Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, January the 10th, 2025. As always, I want to look at the day's astrology and the I Ching. And yes, I will be looking at the astrology and the I Ching for today, January the 10th. But I also want to look at the horoscope of Michael Saylor. So Michael Saylor has been in the news a lot recently. And it's because of his company, Microstrategy. So Microstrategy is a tech company that has had a fairly volatile share price. It listed publicly in, I think, 1998. It did enormously well. Then its share price crashed in 2000. And then in 2020, Michael Saylor made the decision to take his company's spare cash and convert it all into Bitcoin. And over the last couple of years, he's had this strategy of leveraging the company's Bitcoin. So he was using his company's Bitcoin as security to buy more Bitcoin. And so MicroStrategy has collected an enormous amount of Bitcoin, and there seems to be no end of it. And Michael Saylor has said that he will just keep on buying Bitcoin. And so, in theory, you could say the company could go to the moon if the price of Bitcoin keeps moving up. And it is quite a phenomenon. And I thought I would look at Michael Saylor's horoscope, and I thought I'd also look at the horoscope of his company. There are a couple of charts for MicroStrategy. We've got the chart of its incorporation in 1989, and also the chart that it was listed, or rather, it became public. So it became public in, I think, June 1998. So there are a couple of charts to look at. So that's my topic, if you like, today, Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. But before I look at that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is January the 10th, 2025. And yeah, it's a Friday. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. Of course, only subscribe if you enjoy the video. And yeah, so let's look at what's happening today. So here is the horoscope for today, set for noon, January the 10th, 2025, and it's a Friday. And you can see that at noon, New York time, the moon is in Gemini. And so sort of for most of yesterday, we had the moon in Taurus. So a bit of a change has taken place. And that sign change from Gemini to Taurus, I think, is quite noticeable. I mean, moon in Taurus perhaps was a time when things were a bit stuck, a bit fixed, and maybe there was a certain focus on material things and wanting to make sure that everything was right in front of us, that we were in sort of physical contact with everything. I mean, there's still a lot of planets in Earth signs. It's not just the fact we've got Uranus in Taurus, we've also got the Sun and Mercury in Capricorn. But Moon in Gemini does give us a different emphasis. And so what happens is that the Moon moves into Gemini, or moved into Gemini. It made a trine to Pluto, or it's making a trine to Pluto. And then it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. I think that Moon trine Pluto is quite gentle. I mean, it's about being able to create change, but not in a necessarily dramatic way. I mean, we can maybe transform things, but ever so gently. We don't have to make a big fuss about it, and perhaps we shouldn't announce our intentions. If we want to change something, we should just get on with it and just go and do it. And the moon also makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and it makes a square to Venus. So you can see that the moon in Gemini makes a square to Venus in Pisces, and then the conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, you could say moon square Venus Moon conjunct Jupiter, there might be something a little indulgent about that. Whenever you've got the benefics close together, and here we've got Venus starting to make a square to Jupiter, and over the next few days that square will be becoming exact. When you've got that square between Venus and Jupiter, there's a certain danger that you overdo things. Maybe you eat too much, drink too much, or perhaps spend too much. That's always possible. Also, just being too generous. Yeah, it is possible to be too generous. But Moon conjunct Jupiter, it's a fortunate aspect. It brings good luck, and it allows us to be positive and optimistic, and just in general to think the best of things. So that might be a good approach. I mean, I know that Jupiter is somewhat weak at the moment. I mean, it's retrograde. It doesn't have any dignity. It's in Gemini. It's in its detriment. But still, Moon conjunct Gemini, Moon conjunct Jupiter is a nice aspect, regardless of what condition Jupiter is in. And so maybe many of us will find that we are luckier than average. But, there's no harm in being disciplined. Just a little bit of concentration can go a long way. And I'm thinking particularly of the quintile aspect between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury and Saturn are currently 72 degrees apart, and you can see this. Mercury is at 3 degrees. Mercury is at 3 degrees Capricorn. Saturn is at 15 degrees Pisces, so 72 degrees between them. And so Mercury is about the way we think, the way we communicate, the things we say. It says something about our perceptions. And when it's quintile Saturn, we are making a special effort to get ourselves together, to get our thoughts together, to be clear about our ideas. And, I think we can pull it off, especially as Mercury is in Capricorn. I mean, Mercury is in a sign that's ruled by Capricorn. Sorry, Mercury is in a sign that's ruled by Saturn. And so with Mercury quintile Saturn, that means that we can focus, we can concentrate, and we can arrive at the right conclusions. And yes, mental discipline is going to be important. And we might not feel that we can get ourselves together, but if we put the work in, and if we're really able to concentrate, then I do think that we can make good progress. Now, one thing that is happening is the North Node. The North Node, as I was saying yesterday, is about to leave Aries and move into Pisces. In fact, I think tomorrow the North Node is actually out of Aries, and I will be talking more about that, but I need to point out that the North Node is starting to get rather close to Skeet. The Skeet is a sort of fixed star, often associated with sort of accidents and disasters. And, North Node can be about connections. And, with the North Node getting very close to the Aries point, but also conjunct Skeet, we want to meet new people, and we want to make new associations. I mean, okay, not all of us, but some of us might feel that it is important. But maybe we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry. I mean, it's possible North Node conjunct Skeet might, I suppose, quite literally be disastrous associations. So perhaps don't rush into relationships, and don't rush into close contact with another person. I mean, it might seem like a good idea, it might seem like the reasonable thing to do, but do you really know what you're getting yourself involved in? So I think maybe in general it's a time to be a little bit wary of social contact, particularly if you're dealing with people who you don't know and you don't know about their track record. So that's the position of the planets set for New York. So let's just look at the picture for Sydney. Sydney being a representative of Australia and New Zealand and East Asia. And so at midday in Sydney, the moon is actually at 29 degrees 58 Taurus. And at middays, I don't know, in New Zealand, it will be even earlier in Taurus. It'll probably be a degree earlier. So if you are in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, you will find that the first part of the day is covered by Moon in Taurus, and so there might be a big difference in terms of, I don't know, what happens before lunch and what happens after lunch. I mean, before lunch, Moon, I don't know what time you have lunch, assuming you have a fairly early lunch, Moon will be in Taurus, and things may feel a bit staid, and it might feel that not much is going on. But then as the afternoon progresses, as the moon moves into Gemini, the pace may start to quicken. So let's now turn to the heliocentric picture, putting the sun at the center of the solar system in a way where it should be. And so here's the heliocentric picture for today. And I was talking about, yesterday I was talking about a grand trine involving Mercury, Mars and Saturn. In fact, the last couple of days we've had this heliocentric grand trine. And this heliocentric grand trine is still very much in operation. You can see that Mercury is at 22 Scorpio, Mars is at 2344 Cancer, so Mercury is still applying to that trine of Mars. Mercury is just past the trine of Saturn. The Earth is just past the trine of Saturn. But still, we have got Earth and Mars coming together, and it's trine Mercury and Saturn. So there is, as I've been saying, a certain sense of seriousness about this grand trine. I mean, it's not perhaps a usual heliocentric grand trine where things just run easily. I mean, it's because Saturn is involved. It might be that it might be a little bit of hard work, but also a bit of structuring. And this might be a good time to sort of get ourselves together, and particularly with that Mars trine Saturn, Mars trine Mercury. There may be things that we are annoyed about, but we feel we need to say something about. I mean, after all, Mercury heliocentrically is making a trine to Mars, but at the same time, Saturn intervenes, and so this might give us an opportunity to exercise some discipline. And that Mercury-Mars heliocentric trine has a similar message to the geocentric quintile between Mercury and Saturn. So again, there is this idea of organizing ourselves, having an idea about how we should communicate, what the best way to say something is, or perhaps what the best way to write something is, whether it's a letter, email, text message, whatever. What is the best way to string together words? And I think that that Mercury-Mars contact certainly says we've got the desire to communicate, but Saturn trining the Mercury and Mars in the heliocentric chart, it does create some structure. And then we've got that Mercury quintile Saturn geocentrically, which allows us to prepare ourselves. So that's the main thing going on heliocentrically. I'm sure there's other stuff going on which I've missed. A reminder, of course, that Jupiter is now getting very close to a heliocentric square of Saturn now. So there's Jupiter heliocentrically at 1912 Gemini. Saturn is at 2006 Pisces. So getting ever closer. And with the Jupiter-Saturn square, geocentrically, because of retrograde motion, we get 3 squares between Jupiter and Saturn, which are sort of spaced out. And of course, the last square is on the 14th of June 2025, when Jupiter in Cancer is square Saturn in Aries. But in the heliocentric chart, things don't go backwards. There's no retrograde motion. And so that Jupiter-Saturn square is a one-off thing, and I believe this Jupiter-Saturn square heliocentrically, it does say something about the economy, and I was talking about the economy in yesterday's video and how Jupiter and Saturn really control the beat of the economy. They are the two rulers of time, and Jupiter being about expansion, Saturn about contraction, and so we're probably starting to feel this Jupiter-Saturn square already, with concerns about the economy. If you have been following the news, there is more and more discussion about the economy, on interest rates, how bond yields are going up, and what that means for government borrowing, and so on. So anyway, that is the heliocentric picture, and it's now time to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, January the 10th, 2025. Aries. Aries, the moon is starting to move into Gemini, and I think the moon in Gemini, as far as you're concerned, is something that should be really welcomed. I think that with the moon moving into Gemini, you just feel that things are easier and there's more flow. You don't have to worry quite so much about the physical world. I mean, I know the physical world's important, but Aries sometimes finds the physical world rather tedious, and I think that with the moon moving into Gemini, there is more variety and more excitement, and at the same time, Aries, you just feel that you've got quite a lot to say, and once you start talking, it might be a bit difficult to stop, and variety is going to be important to you. Perhaps you felt that recently there just wasn't enough variety, but now you can increasingly find what you're looking for, and there'll be something about the way you communicate which demonstrates a real sense of excitement. I mean, a somewhat tense excitement, but still an excitement. The view that you want something to happen, and you're always ready for something to happen, and you're ready to take the initiative, and if something is going to happen, you will be where the action is, and that's really how you would like it to be. And so probably Aries, it's not going to be a day when you're going to want to stay in exactly one place. I think that movement is going to be very important, and the more places you can be, the better. So over the course of the day, in an ideal world, you might be, in 5 or 6 different places. I think possibly Aries, you may get bored quite quickly. And so getting intellectual stimulation, I suppose, is going to matter. But you don't want to get bored too quickly, and you don't want to lose your focus. And, remember, Aries, Mercury is moving through Capricorn, and Mercury moving through Capricorn is something that really can't be avoided. And yes, you might have a limited attention span, but you also know that some things really do matter, and they do need you to really give it everything you've got. I think that you're not going to be entirely comfortable concentrating on one thing today. And it may require a certain amount of willpower, but I think it is worth making the effort. And if you really make the effort to concentrate and to ignore distractions, I think that you can get away with it. I think you can manage to really see through the chaos and get through the other side and maintain your focus. I think part of that is because Mercury is quintile Saturn. So Mercury quintile Saturn is about mental concentration and being able to, work out what is important and then give it everything you've got. And I do think that that is something that you very much can do. And I suppose I should remind you that today might be the last full day when the North Node is in Aries. And so, that is another good reason why you need to focus and you need to concentrate and concentrate on what matters. Not just on what matters, but who matters. I mean, there's some controversy about what the North Node actually means. I mean, there is a view in astrology that the North Node is about your karma or what you should be going towards. You came into this life to do something, and that's the North Node. You're trying to get away from the past. That's the South Node. And that may well be the case. North Node in Aries, it's all about you, and it should be all about you. And it's all about what you want. And I don't think you should be afraid of being demanding with North Node in Aries. And maybe today, maybe just as we move into the weekend, maybe your last chance to make a set of demands. And if you leave it until next week, you may feel that you've perhaps lost the moment. But the North Node can also be about connections. And the North Node is conjunct Aries, conjunct the Aries point. And I think today it is a time when you can make good connections. And if there's someone you want to perhaps introduce yourself to or talk to or find out about, now might be your chance. And if you leave it any longer, well, the North Node won't be in Aries. Well, it won't be in Aries for nearly 20 years. So you've got a day left to make the most of North Node in Aries. I'm sure you can do it, not least because of that Moon conjunct Jupiter. Moon conjunct Jupiter is actually a very good combination for making connections. You can go from place to place, introduce yourself to lots of different people. Some of these people might not be of any use, but other people will be useful. And I think overall you can be sociable and you can have a fun time. Taurus, the moon is leaving your sign and it's moving into Gemini. So this is a bit of a change. And you perhaps got used to over the last couple of days to have perhaps the stability of the moon in Taurus. And now with the moon in Gemini, your priorities might change. Though in a way, from a Taurean perspective, Gemini is quite a materialistic sign. After all, it is a sign following your sign, and so it does represent your resources. And so with the moon in Gemini, you might be thinking about what you have, what you don't have, and how best to get what you want. And this is especially the case as the moon is making a trine to Pluto. So at the moment the moon enters Gemini, makes that trine to Pluto, and that does make you think about what you can do to get what you want, and get what you want perhaps in quite a material sense. And I think that your understanding of what matters materially, could be important, not just in terms of yourself, but also perhaps in terms of your ambitions and how you relate to the wider world. And I think if you have a job or you have a business, I think your understanding of financial realities could actually be quite important. You'll perhaps be able to see things in ways which, other people just miss. They can't see it. And, other people might be quite fixed in their attitudes to money. They might take the view that money only has one dimension, money can be only made in one particular way. But you have a certain imagination to you at the moment, and you can see several opportunities at once. And so perhaps you should take advantage of this and see what you can do, see what is available, and yes, be open about what you think is possible, even if that might feel that you're taking a bit of a risk. Maybe you might be a bit worried about embarrassing yourself if you make suggestions which on the surface seem overambitious. But you can only try. I mean, you can suggest something. What's the worst that can happen? People can tell you that you're allowing your imagination to run away with you. And, when the moon makes that trine to Pluto, it then moves on to a square of Venus and a conjunction with Jupiter. So they perhaps operate in two rather different ways, although we could see moon square Venus, moon conjunct Jupiter as being the same movement. I mean, I think that the moon square Venus is perhaps more difficult than moon conjunct Jupiter. I mean, moon square Venus, there may be a time over the course of a day when you're tempted to perhaps spend too much money, or you get confused by something and you're not sure whether you should do something, where you shouldn't do something, and you might indulge yourself. I mean, Taurus is an indulgent sign. It can be. I mean, indeed, every healthy Taurus has a streak of indulgence. When you see a Taurus who has no vices, no indulgences, no luxuries, well, then there's something really to be worried about. But the moon, having made that square to Venus, it does make a conjunction to Jupiter. And, moon conjunct Jupiter can be fortunate. And hopefully you're going to see the Moon-Jupiter conjunction in its best possible light. I mean, I suppose you could see the Moon-Jupiter conjunction in two ways. I mean, in a negative sense, you could see Moon conjunct Jupiter as just being an extension of a moon square Venus. So you could say, well, Moon's making a square of Venus, then it's making a conjunction to Jupiter. So what's that going to do? It's just going to encourage you to overspend, not worry about money, to exaggerate what is possible, live in the present, think that it's more important to enjoy yourself than to look after your financial interests, abuse your credit card. That's the kind of thing that could happen, I suppose, with Moon square Venus and conjunct Jupiter. But an alternative way of looking at the Moon conjunct Jupiter is to say, well, Moon conjunct Jupiter is a fortunate aspect. I mean, Jupiter is the great benefic, and I know that it's not in a great position. I mean, Jupiter's retrograde, it's in Gemini, the sign of its detriment, but still, it is Moon conjunct Jupiter. I mean, that is a lucky aspect, and perhaps you can make it a lucky aspect. One way of making it a lucky aspect is to have a certain amount of discipline, and also with Moon conjunct Jupiter, consider what might be possible. Moon-Jupiter conjunction is about possibilities, and if you put yourself in a position where you can be lucky, then there's a good chance that you will be lucky. And in terms of money, I suppose there's no harm in asking for something. Perhaps you feel you should be paid more money, or perhaps you're looking for an opportunity to get hold of some money one way or another, and you may feel that you're trying your luck, but who knows? And with the Moon Jupiter conjunction, well, you could say that pretty much anything is possible. And it's important that you do think the best. I know that there is a certain temptation, Taurus, to think, well, it's not for you. It's not going to go your way. But if something has gone wrong in the past, well, it will go wrong in the future as well. And so there might be a little bit of negativity creeping in today, but I think it's actually completely unnecessary with that conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. And I really do think that things can actually move your way. And if there's something you want overall today, I really do think that you're in a good position to get it. Though, don't feel, Taurus, that you have to do everything on your own, that the inspiration has to come from you. Do consider other people and other people's output, and you shouldn't be closed-minded. It may be that some of the people around you do something that you really weren't expecting, or perhaps they say something you that hadn't occurred to you, and it may be an opportunity, it may be a suggestion, something you hadn't thought about. And yes, it might have a financial element, or if you're feeling ever so slightly stuck, you might hear something and that might inspire you to just have another go at something. And if you do have another go at something, then I think, in the end, you might be, very, very pleased with the results. So, that's the broad picture today. I think there is a financial emphasis which can't really be avoided. And I do think that you do have an element of choice. You can decide whether it's a day for being careless with money and being sloppy and spending more money than you need to spend, or it can be a day when you are responsible and you're disciplined and you're ambitious and you take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. And in that way, you can turn things around. And I think that it might even turn out to be quite a profitable day. Okay, you may not get the money today that you are looking for, but I think you can lay the foundations for it, at the least. Gemini, we have the moon moving through your sign, and it's pretty solidly in Gemini. Even if you're in Australia and New Zealand, by the early afternoon, the moon will be in Gemini. So I think we can see this as a moon in Gemini day. And the moon, while it's in Gemini, it makes a trine to Pluto at the beginning of the day, and then it moves on to make a conjunction with Jupiter. It also makes a square to Venus. So, that moon trine Pluto, I kind of regard that as like a bit of a reminder, for you. It's a reminder perhaps of what you should be doing, with Pluto in Aquarius, and with Pluto in Aquarius Gemini, it's not a time to be, stuck in one place. It's a time to be thinking about possibilities and actually to be putting yourself in a larger framework. I think that is a fundamental Pluto challenge for Geminis. Let's not forget, Pluto is going to be in Gemini Pluto's going to be in Aquarius until, is it 2043, something like that, for the next nearly 20 years. And so with Pluto moving in Aquarius, moving through Aquarius for such a long period of time, I think the challenge for Geminis is to give yourself, a framework and a purpose, and not to rip things to bits with your Gemini mind, your Gemini analysis, your Gemini criticism. You've got to put yourself in a broad framework, it might be a spiritual framework, it might be an ideological framework, but purpose underpins the whole thing, and every Gemini needs a purpose, and I think Gemini of all the signs might lose a sense of that purpose because they just perhaps ask one question too many. And so with the moon trine Gemini, the moon with the moon in Gemini trine Pluto, then this gives you an opportunity to revisit this challenge and just perhaps to start to acclimatize yourself to it, and in terms of your responses to the world around you. And you might feel, if you really try hard, you might start to see that there's a certain purpose behind it all. I mean, you still have your doubts, perhaps, but that purpose is becoming clearer. And so I think that moon trine Pluto, in a small way, for you could be quite transforming. And then the moon makes a square to Venus and a conjunction to Jupiter. Now, that conjunction to Venus and square to Jupiter, that conjunction to Jupiter, square to Venus, because moon squares Venus and then it makes a conjunction to Jupiter, I would regard that actually as being pretty fortunate. I mean, moon square Venus, I know that aspect has a certain indulgent reputation, but we have to remember that Venus is in Pisces, the sign of its exaltation, and of course the moon is in your sign. And I think that moon square Venus actually challenges you to show a bit of sympathy and understanding to other people. Not other people who perhaps you meet all the time, not necessarily your friends or your family, but maybe people you work with, people you have to sort of deal with out there, people who have a role, people who have a function. When there are issues of authority and leadership, who is the authority figure? Is it you? Is it them? Whatever it is, I think you can show an understanding, and by showing an understanding, you gain respect, and people perhaps see a different side to you, and they see that you're not just an analytical Gemini, that you do have powerful feelings and you can empathize. And then the moon makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So moon-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, I think, allows you to project a positive, optimistic vibe that I think that everyone is going to appreciate. And I think that you're going to be able to see the best in things. But I'm not saying that you're going to be sloppy. I mean, I suppose you could be sloppy. I mean, that is a possibility. Moon conjunct Jupiter, moon square Venus, that is one way of looking at it. But I think you're helped by the fact that Mercury is making a quintile to Saturn. So Mercury is your ruler, and it's in Capricorn, and it's making a 72-degree aspect to Saturn. And that Mercury-Saturn quintile gives you an idea of the kind of person you'd like to be, the kind of image you'd like to project as well. And it is about discipline. I mean, after all, Saturn is the planet of discipline. And so you might get an idea about your image, and also about how you want to, enact your responsibilities. And there's a seriousness there. I mean, Geminis sometimes aren't very serious because you ask yourself, what is the point? I mean, it goes back to this existential issue that many Geminis feel. But you can, I think, rise to the occasion with this Mercury quintile Saturn. You can give the impression that you take something seriously, even if you have your doubts. And by giving the impression that you are serious, I think that you can end up by gaining people's respect, and it does mean that you're going to be pretty effective. Cancer. Cancer, we have a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter in Gemini. So, we can see this Moon-Jupiter conjunction in several ways. I mean, one approach is to say, well, Moon and Jupiter are conjunct in Gemini. What does Gemini mean to you? It's a sign that is perhaps familiar with you, familiar to you. Gemini comes before Cancer, so perhaps you're thinking about it and you have ideas about what Gemini actually means. If you've got your Sun in Cancer, then of course there's a good chance that you've also got planets in Gemini, in particular Mercury or Venus in this sign. So it's possible that you have a certain familiarity with the sign Gemini, but it is different from Cancer, and there's a feeling with the Moon in Gemini that you don't want to reveal everything. You feel that some things, Cancer, are really best kept to yourself. If you were to reveal them, who knows what might happen. And besides, you still have to sort of work things through in your own way, and you don't really want to make decisions. And that is absolutely reasonable. And because the Moon is in Gemini. In a way, the Moon represents you, and if you're in Gemini, there's a certain feeling that you're not quite sure which way to go. You could go this way, you could go that way, and you don't really want to make a commitment here. And this process of making up your mind possibly is quite private. You're making a decision on your own. So that's one way of looking at this Moon-Jupiter conjunction. Another way is to say, well, Jupiter is a benefic. Jupiter is the great benefic. And so if the Moon is conjunct Jupiter, that gives you a certain blessing. And Jupiter is a planet that has a special relationship to Cancer. It may not be Cancer's ruler by sign, but it is actually Cancer's ruler by exaltation, because Jupiter is exalted in the sign Cancer. And I think that Moon-Jupiter conjunction does make you lucky, and things will work out very well for you. But then you have to consider, under what circumstances will things work out well for you? And I think that they're going to work out best when you're on your own, when you're not surrounded by other people. All that noise, perhaps competition as well, is not going to help your concentration. But when you're on your own, when you're doing things your way, I think that things will run very smoothly, and you just might stumble into something you weren't expecting. Perhaps you weren't prepared for it, but when you look at it, you'll realize that this really might be an opportunity. Though Cancer, it's important, whatever you're doing today, that you're not close-minded. And it may be that you come across ideas, concepts, people who are perhaps different from yourself. I say people, I've suggested that it might be a day when you feel you don't want to be heavily involved socially, but even then you might come across people with ideas and people with views of the world that are perhaps slightly different from your own, and there might be a certain clash there. And it's not like a clash of anger, but more just a just a feeling that you and another person see things in different ways, and I suppose you should try to be tolerant. But also, Cancer, you can play a role in how other people reach their decisions. I mean, people are in a process of making up their minds, and you're not the only one who's feeling indecisive. I have suggested, and I suggested at the beginning of this piece on Cancer, that you might not be sure which way to go. But yeah, other people have some of the same issues, and you might think that certain people, maybe certain sort of organizations, certain groups of people have made commitments, but they haven't necessarily made commitments, and people can still be swayed by good arguments in particular. And in your own subtle Cancerian way, you can actually persuade someone to change their mind. And it might not be as difficult as you'd imagined. I mean, it's not about forcing them to change their mind. You can do it in a very subtle, in that Cancerian way. I mean, Cancerians can be very good at sort of operating on an emotional level and understanding what's important to people and knowing what to say. And by understanding another person's insecurities, you can tell them what they want to hear. And I suppose if you want to be manipulative and you're concerned that someone is going in the wrong way, you can encourage them to question what they really took for granted. In other words, you can perhaps make someone else feel insecure, and by making them feel insecure, you can perhaps then say, well, okay, you feel insecure, but if you follow my ideas, my view of the world, then things are going to be easier. You are going to perhaps feel more secure. So there is scope there, Cancer, for you to be a little bit manipulative, but don't push it. Leo, the moon is moving into Gemini, and from a Leo perspective, I think that means that you're going to perhaps be a little more sociable than you have been over the last few days. I mean, I think that perhaps over the last few days, you have been a little over-concentrated on yourself and your own needs. And I think with the moon in Gemini, you're perhaps better able to understand, what other people want and what their priorities might be. And, you can perhaps change your approach to deal with different people, with different personalities. And I think that the moon in Gemini is certainly going to help out there. And at the same time, your moon in Gemini does make a trine to Pluto. And I think that moon-Pluto trine does give you an opportunity to really understand people, to perhaps have another look at who they are, and perhaps change your opinions about them. I mean, maybe you had a fixed opinion about someone. Maybe it was a negative opinion, but that moon trine Pluto perhaps gives you another view, and you might be prepared to give someone another chance. Or maybe you realize that someone isn't as heavy and perhaps even intimidating as you thought they were. I mean, that can be how Pluto moving in Aquarius works, because Pluto, when did Pluto go into Aquarius? November the 17th, something like that. And so with Pluto going into Aquarius in the sort of Leo chart, there was a certain heaviness there. And with the moon trine Pluto, things do lighten up a bit. And moon in Gemini, the two-bodied sign, getting an alternative view. And then the moon in Gemini makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and that moon-Jupiter conjunction will allow you to, be yourself. And I think that you can be very positive, and you can be even a sort of a larger-than-life person, and just keep moving. And you don't have to be too intense. You can just be yourself and be happy, and don't make things too difficult or take things too seriously. I think that's perhaps an important point. I think if you take things too seriously, and if you start raising serious issues, that may not go down too well. I mean, there are things maybe that do have to be discussed at some later stage, but I don't think they have to be discussed right now. I think instead, Leo, it's a time when you should just be expressing yourself and expressing, what you can do. And I think when you're in company, when you're in a group, surrounded by people, I think that you will feel quite alive, and you can perhaps show off certain skills that you're not perhaps always able to demonstrate. But I think you can now show what kind of person you really are, and I do think that in most cases that really will be appreciated. So, the overall message today, Leo, I think is just to enjoy other people's company and don't take things too seriously, and do recognize that you actually have quite a lot to offer. And also when you're with people, you might get a new view, and you might just see what is possible in the future. It's not just about what you're trying to achieve, what your ambitions are. It's about something larger than that, and it's about your hopes for the future. And perhaps some people do reflect these hopes, and maybe your faith in human nature can be restored by positive, constructive interaction with the right kinds of people. Virgo, one aspect we have today is a quintile between Mercury and Saturn. And, we have Mercury in Capricorn, a quintile Saturn in Pisces. And that quintile, I think, is quite useful. Although I would have said this quintile is optional. By optional, I mean, I don't think it's anything that's going to be dumped upon you. It's not anything like a difficult situation or some piece of luck, whether it's a positive or negative dumping. It's not going to be dumped upon you. It's something you can take advantage of if you want to take advantage of it. And I would have said that this Mercury quintile Saturn is about looking at yourself and asking yourself what you've achieved, and also considering what you haven't achieved, where you might feel that you're short of the mark. And Mercury quintile Saturn can be about self-discipline, and it starts as an internal mental process. You're trying to get yourself together. You certainly have an idea about how you'd like to come across, but are you actually able to succeed? Well, in the first instance, maybe not. But if you work at it, you will eventually start making progress. And what can happen is that you, as a creative, clever, talented person, can bring everything together and demonstrate what you can do and who you can be. And I think that people may be surprised, but it does require a certain amount of hard work. But I don't think hard work is a problem today. I think it actually might be quite important. And it's not just about that Mercury quintile Saturn. It's also about the fact that the moon is moving into Gemini. And with the moon moving into Gemini and making a trine to Pluto, I think that you're going to feel that you need to do something, that you want to make an impression, and you may feel that it has to be done now. And there may even be a certain amount of obsession here. It's got to be done. It's got to be done right. But I think obsession probably in a fortunate sense. There's nothing wrong with obsession in itself. I mean, what is obsession? I mean, obsession is just taking something really seriously and not letting go of it. I mean, it might seem unhealthy from another person's perspective, but there is a place for obsession. And if you really feel obsessed about getting something right and you're being constructive about it, then I don't think you have to apologize. And, if you keep working at it, and if you are a perfectionist, maybe perfection is something you can get very close to achieving. And the moon, having made that trine to Pluto, it moves on and it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. And that conjunction between the moon and Jupiter, I would have said, is entirely fortunate, and it allows you to project yourself in a very constructive way, and you are able to come over perhaps as a larger than life person. And I know that from a sort of stereotypical textbook sense, you don't normally associate the sign Virgo with being a larger than life person. I mean, I don't see why not. But yeah, you can be a larger than life person, and this is what you project, or this is what you can project. And you can also do it in a way that is very concentrated and very disciplined, because it's not just the fact that we've got the moon conjunct Jupiter in Gemini, it's also we've got a quintile between Mercury and Saturn. So, you use that Mercury's quintile Saturn to get yourself together, get yourself organized, and at the same time, you can really project who you are. And so today, Virgo, you can actually end up having quite a powerful impact, and in the process you can be very attractive and charismatic, and people are going to notice you, and I think that they're going to notice you for all the right reasons. And in fact, this charisma and attractiveness may actually spill over into other areas of your life, for example, relationships. And I think in some terms of one-to-one relationships, I think the people close to you, I think, are going to respond to you very well, and they're going to sort of pick up on your charisma and your attractiveness, and you just, I think you're going to be someone that people are going to want to be around, and I think you'll make good company. Libra, you, I think, are quite open-minded, even far-sighted. I don't think you want to restrict yourself today. I think you're aware, Libra, that there are actually many opportunities around, many opportunities that really are available to you. And so, yeah, there's a sense that you really don't want to restrict yourself to any one thing. I think it's always a good idea to have at least two things on the boil, and also to be aware that there's no such thing as a right answer. There is a such thing as a right answer in a trivial sense, like 2 + 2 = 4. But in a broader sense, don't feel that you've necessarily arrived at an absolute truth. Especially with the moon in Gemini and the moon making a conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini. Gemini represents two possibilities, and there is one way of looking at things and there is another way of looking at things, and it's not the case that one way is better than the other, and you should always bear that in mind and just accept that there are always alternative views, and those alternative views in some cases might be challenging. I mean, I do think at the moment, Venus is in Pisces. Venus is making a conjunction to Saturn. I mean, it's not a very exact conjunction to Saturn, but Venus, your ruler, conjunction in Pisces, conjunct Saturn, does suggest to me that you're trying to find some sense of order, and that moon Jupiter conjunction in Gemini may be a little bit challenging. Having to accept that you haven't necessarily got the right answer, but that doesn't mean just because you haven't got the right answer doesn't mean you've got the wrong answer, and that underlines what I'm saying, that the truth is perhaps negotiable. I mean, the key elements of the truth are negotiable, and you shouldn't feel challenged by alternative truths. And if you can be flexible, I mean, I think that that would be great. Now, one thing that I should point out is that the North Node is about to change sign. Now, in fact, I think it's tomorrow that the North Node moves out of Libra and moves into Pisces. So the North Node, let me say it again. The North Node moves out of Aries and moves into Pisces. And so North Node has been in Aries, I think, since the summer of 2023. So it's about sort of 18 months that the North Node is in a sign. And so with the North Node about to move into Pisces, perhaps you need to think about what it meant for the North Node to be in Aries, because Aries is your opposite sign, and it's a slightly complicated thing because Aries is about action. It's about the individual taking the initiative. Yet it's also about, from a Libran perspective, it's also about the sign which is opposite Libra. So how does one actually understand the North Node in Aries from a Libran perspective? Well, I think it is about you accepting that you have a certain responsibility to take action. But the North Node is in Aries in a way for all of us, regardless of our sign. But perhaps with North Node in Aries in the sign opposite Libra, and you being a Libra, it's perhaps about taking action on the basis of another person's example. I mean, that may be a way of looking at it. Action is not like one person taking the action, another person following. People can take action together, whether it's as a pair or whether it's as a group, and it's not about one person being better than another person. It's just a general feeling that you and other people can sort of move in the same direction and at the same time completely respect each other's individuality. And you have to think about that in your own way, and I think it would be a good idea to perhaps reflect on what's been going on since the summer of 2023 and how you have understood the North Node moving through Aries, because it's over. This, at least the true North Node, is leaving Aries. Tomorrow it's in Pisces. Now, the mean node, that's different. The mean node stays in Aries until the end of the month, but I'm inclined to use the true node rather than the mean node. So Libra, do think about that. And as the North Node comes to 0 degrees Aries, as it's doing right now, this just could be an important point for you. And in general, it's perhaps how you think about relationships and how you think about the balance. And it's not about one person having all the control, another person just doing exactly what they're told. It is about getting the balance right. And maybe that's something you need to think about, and also something that you need perhaps to talk about, because the North Node and the South Node as well are making a square to Mercury. So perhaps in terms of relationships, it may be a time for honesty. And if anything is at all out of balance today, you feel someone's got too much power, someone's got not enough power, then maybe today's the day when you need to discuss it. I mean, it's a Friday. It's a day that is ruled by Venus. Now might be the chance to talk about it, because tomorrow the North Node will be out of Aries, and it won't come back to Aries for nearly 20 years. Scorpio, it's a time, Scorpio, as I kind of started to suggest yesterday, I think, when you may feel that things aren't quite as simple as they should be. I mean, I know that Scorpios in general can deal with a relatively high level of complexity, especially on an emotional level. But still, I think you'd perhaps like things to be a little easier, I mean, at least to begin with, and you may feel that you're not quite ready to sort of wade in sort of too deep. But, with the moon moving into Gemini and the moon making a conjunction to Jupiter, this is perhaps the way forward. And moon conjunct Jupiter is, of course, it's a fortunate conjunction, and it does seem that there are opportunities, but the opportunities, Scorpio, are not perhaps in simple places. If you want to take advantage of things, you may have to go further afield. And when I say further afield, I'm not necessarily talking about sort of physically further afield. It's more about depth and being prepared to look at things deeply and to not be satisfied with what things look like on the surface, because it's under the surface where you can find really what you're looking for, where you can find, if you like, the gold. This is not a landscape where you've got nuggets of gold just lying there ready to be picked up. The gold, as you might expect, lies underground, and so that's something that you have really got to recognize, and also you shouldn't feel that you've understood everything. There are things remaining to be understood, and there are also connections to be made, and those connections may happen quite suddenly, and you might have moments of inspiration. The inspiration, it takes its time, but if you're in the right place, if you're not being crowded out, and you give your mind free rein, and not just your mind, but your emotions free rein, and perhaps it's like heart and mind working together, you might suddenly realize something, and it just occurs to you, just like that. And it might be a case of, you're wondering, why didn't you realize it before? And all of a sudden, Scorpio, it's just completely obvious, and as a result, you just feel a whole lot better. And I suppose part of it might relate to the fact that Mars is moving towards a trine of Neptune. Now, that Mars trine Neptune is not exact today. I think the Mars trine Neptune becomes exact over the weekend, but you're certainly starting to feel it. So what's happening is that Mars is retrograde. Mars is your ruler. It is moving retrograde. It's moving to a trine of Neptune. And, with that trine to Neptune, I think that, in your case, I think you certainly are sensitive, and you're able to assert yourself in perhaps a rather indirect way. I mean, this is already the case since Mars moved into Cancer. Remember, Mars in Cancer, sign of a crab. Crabs kind of move sideways, and they don't make much noise, and they don't go for direct attacks. They like to do sideways initiatives, and that Mars trine Neptune just allows you to make an impression, but in ever so gently, ever so subtly. I suppose you're like the tide, sort of washing things away, and then all of a sudden things slip, the obstacles slip, and everything becomes clear. So Scorpio, in terms of assertion, making things happen, getting your way, that this Mars trine Neptune, it allows you to be, subtle, but also, really dynamic at the same time, dynamically subtle. And over the next few days, I do think that, things will move your way, and no one will quite know how it happens. Even you might not know how it happens, but I think that your ability to act behind the scenes in that very Scorpio way could really work in your favor. Sagittarius, there's action in Gemini. We've got a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter in Gemini, and I mentioned this conjunction, I think, yesterday, right at the end of my piece on Sagittarius yesterday, and I took the view that Moon in Gemini for you was going to work in your favor, and I said I was going to say some more about it. And I think that while the Moon was in Taurus, it just might have been for you a little bit difficult, or at the very least a little bit underwhelming. I mean, Taurus and Sagittarius are two signs that don't entirely connect with each other, but with Moon moving into Gemini, all of a sudden there is more variety, and there are more possibilities. I think there are possibilities today which didn't really seem to exist yesterday, and yesterday being Thursday, and now you can see that you have a choice. You may have several choices. There's always at least two choices, maybe three or four choices, but that is the nature of Gemini. Gemini is about two twins. I suppose we don't have a sign of triplets, three choices, but there's always that possibility of more than two choices. And so with the Moon moving into Gemini, with the Moon making a conjunction starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, which is your ruler, suddenly things are happening. And I don't think you have to feel that it's always down to you to make things happen. I think that if you put yourself in the right place, I think that you'll find that other people are quite inspiring, and they perhaps are ready to make suggestions. So it's not always down to you to work out what's going to happen. I mean, it often is. I mean, that's the nature of Sagittarius. I mean, Sagittarius is a fire sign. Sagittarius can be quite an exciting sign, and other people might look to you for excitement. But today, I think that you can get that excitement from outside, and at the same time, there's absolutely nothing you have to compromise. In fact, it's important you don't compromise, because anyone that is worth bothering with will understand that you are special, that you shouldn't compromise. If you compromise, it's not just you that suffer, it's everyone else that suffers. And that's especially the case as the North Node is about to change sign. And the North Node, this is the last day that the true North Node is in Aries. And I don't know how you feel about the last year and a half while the North Node has been moving through Aries, but I think Sagittarius, it should have been a time when you were really able to concentrate on what made you different. You know, there are some things that everyone can do. There are some things that are just standard to just about every human being out there, and there are other things which some people have it and some people don't. And with the North Node in Aries, we're talking about the things that you have, which make you unique, which need to be really built up on, and which you need to nurture, and which cannot be compromised. And so Sagittarius, I'm hoping that in this last day, just before the North Node goes into Pisces, that you're able to reflect on this and work out what it is that makes you so unique. And this feeds back to what I was saying about other people. Other people today, they can make suggestions, not just today, but into the weekend. They can make suggestions. They can perhaps provide some excitement, but not at the expense of your own individuality. In fact, if things are working well, and I think things can work well, the people you're with will really just appreciate your individuality, and they'll support your individuality, and whatever they suggest is going to be something that relates to you, and it's something that you can handle. And it's not about you having to give anything away or compromise. That is just absolutely unnecessary. So I think that you can benefit from what's happening in the world, and I suppose you might have to make certain choices. I mean, not everyone is prepared to work on your behalf. I mean, some people are just sort of wrapped up in themselves and wrapped up in their own priorities, and they're not necessarily going to be very useful to you. But there are other people who can be a real plus in your life, and I think these are the kinds of people who, at the moment, you should be seeking out. Capricorn. Capricorn, you are able to really concentrate on something that does seem to be important to you. And I suppose that means you have to think about, what it is, what really matters at the moment. What is your number one priority? And, you mustn't think too much about external demands and that kind of thing. You have to think about what's important to you. And it might not be immediately obvious. And the one reason it might not be immediately obvious is because you have to perhaps worry too much about, what other people are demanding. But really, Capricorn, it's what matters to you. And it's a time when you perhaps have to sit down and work it out, and yes, be very disciplined about it. Force yourself to think and, yeah, decide what that number one priority is. And once you realize what matters, then give it everything you've got. And it's not a situation where you have to explain. I mean, you might want to explain, but sometimes explaining makes you vulnerable, because then you have to justify yourself, and you might not feel that you can justify yourself well enough. Then you have to start listening to other people's justifications, and so that would perhaps weaken you. So if there is any dialogue today, maybe Capricorn, at the moment, that dialogue should be taking place in your own head, in terms of what you feel matters. And once you've made up your mind and you've decided what's important, then you can give it everything you've got. And as you keep going, your power will increase, your power will get stronger and stronger. And so, it's a day when you can really get a lot done. When I say get a lot done, I mean, it's not like you're doing lots of different things. It's like you're doing one thing, and you do that one thing well, and it really does make a difference. And don't be distracted. The moon, it does make a square to Venus, and so that moon square Venus may be about a distraction. Moon square Venus does indicate something or someone who wants your attention, perhaps is almost demanding your attention. I mean, it's easy to give in, but I don't think it's necessary. And again, it's another case where, the less said, the better. And the moon, having made a square to Venus, it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. And that moon-Jupiter conjunction, I think, is pretty fortunate. I mean, moon-Jupiter conjunction as an aspect does sort of emanate an idea of things working out. And for you, that moon-Jupiter conjunction just helps you in terms of your work, in terms of the, whatever you feel needs to be accomplished. It just works very well, and it's just easy. One thing follows on to another, and everything is fine. And that moon-Jupiter conjunction may be relevant to relationships. And the moon-Jupiter conjunction may be about someone who is perhaps not in themselves in a particularly strong position, but they mean well. And perhaps that moon-Jupiter conjunction is about someone who just maybe needs a little bit of focus, needs a bit of guidance, and you're perhaps a person to provide it. So in terms of relationships, I think that you can certainly benefit from certain people, but it just has to be done on your terms, and you have to make sure that people are listening to you. I don't think it's a day when you want to be following other people's orders. It's really not that kind of day. I think it's a day when it's all about you, and if you make it all about you, it won't just be the case that you will benefit, but actually in the end I think everyone will benefit. Aquarius, you are at the moment, I think, in a fairly playful mood. I don't think that you're taking things too seriously, and I think that you have a sense of what is possible, what is achievable, and I don't think that you want to take anything too seriously, I don't think there's any need for you to take anything too seriously. I mean, if something becomes an effort, then, what is the point? And, instead, you just focus on what you enjoy. And that might seem a little bit indulgent, just focusing on what you enjoy doing. But I think today it's the right approach, especially as we've got, firstly we've got Moon trine Pluto, and then we've got Moon conjunct Jupiter. So, that Moon trine Pluto, it is about what you enjoy. It's not about what you enjoy in a trivial way. I mean, Moon trine Pluto is about what you really enjoy. It's what gives you satisfaction, a feeling that you are in control and no one can tell you what to do, but at the same time there's no effort. It just naturally flows forth, and you just then get a great sense of your own power. And then the moon, having made a trine to Pluto, it moves on and it makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and that moon conjunct Jupiter is an aspect that I would have said was really very creative. And it may be that you're able to take something which you feel is not in particularly good shape. Maybe it's something that needs a bit of repair. I mean, after all, Jupiter is going retrograde. It's in Gemini, which is in the sign of its detriment. Jupiter is peregrine. That means it has no dignity. But with that moon conjunct Jupiter, you take something that, is in a state of disrepair, or you think it's in a state of disrepair, and in some way you can just transform it. And maybe it's the moon, having made that trine to Pluto, moves on the conjunction to Jupiter. So it's perhaps the moon is kind of having some kind of transforming influence. And it just may be just about having the right attitude. You have a playful but optimistic attitude, and you just take something that perhaps you're out of practice, or something needs to be fixed, or someone else needs some encouragement, someone who might seem to be in bad shape, someone who feels sorry for themselves, but you provide that extra impetus, and you have that generally positive view, and all of a sudden, things start to happen. And so I think it's a day when really, Aquarius, I think it's just important that there isn't any pressure, and you just take whatever is available and you make the most of it. And it doesn't matter if the resources you have seem to, on the surface, to be in poor repair or seem to be second rate. It doesn't matter. The point is you're making the most of everything. And if you make the most of everything and you give it your best, then it's almost like there can be some kind of transformation, and it can almost be like magic, even like alchemy. Maybe today you really can turn lead into gold. Pisces, the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and Jupiter is, of course, your ruler. And so with this moon-Jupiter conjunction, you're feeling a sense that you have in some ways arrived somewhere, and you don't necessarily have to move. I mean, why should you move? It seems that by and large you've got what you need, and so if you're feeling comfortable, why change anything? And the Moon-Jupiter conjunction, which it is a fortunate aspect, that Moon-Jupiter conjunction may be about your home or your family or just somewhere you feel comfortable, and you just feel that things are just developing nicely, and suggestions to make a change or move somewhere different, it's unnecessary. You can stay, I think in most cases you can stay exactly where you are. And also we have got, the moon is making a square to Venus, and Venus is moving through your sign. Venus is in Pisces. I mean, sometimes that moon square Venus can be difficult. It can be a little bit overindulgent, but I don't think that's the case at the moment. I don't think that's the case today. I think you can just relax where you are, and I think that there's something about you which actually makes other people feel relaxed, and you can bring people into your sphere if that's what you want. I mean, there's no obligation to bring new people into your life. I'm probably talking about people who are around already, and I think that you can very much benefit from this perhaps rather a closed environment, but not a narrow environment. It's an environment of your making, and I think that if you are feeling grounded, then that allows you to not just feel alive, but it allows you to start to think about the future, and to make sure that the future is created on just a very sort of secure footing. And I don't think that today is a day when you should be obsessed about variety. I mean, I know that the moon is in Gemini, and one often says the moon in Gemini is about variety. Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini is about variety. But you don't want to have too much variety. You just want to just concentrate on what makes you happy, and perhaps what makes certain other people happy. So I think it can be a fairly straightforward day when you don't really have to do anything, and maybe it's just as simple as that. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I want to consider the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 51, which is thunderbolts. And so you can see this if you look at the hexagram. You can see thunder over thunder. You see you've got the top three lines. The top trigram is repeated, so that is thunder over thunder. And so thunderbolts represents a surprise, and it's something happening that we weren't expecting, like a thunderbolt. And our first response to this thunderbolt is to think that is really heavy, and we think that something bad has happened, that we think it is a complete disaster, and our first impulse might be to panic. But the I Ching is quite reassuring. The I Ching tells us that there's absolutely no need to panic, that things can carry on as before. I mean, one of the images that the I Ching uses is of maybe a country that's being invaded. Perhaps our village has been invaded, the invading army. But nothing changes. People just carry on doing their usual rituals. The I Ching talks about the spoon carrying incense and making some kind of offering, and the spoon doesn't spill anything. That there might be this sort of environment of thunderbolts, but still we make the usual offering, and none of the incense gets dropped. So, that tells us that there is really perhaps no need to panic. Now, we do have three lines moving. Bottom line moves, the third line from the bottom moves, and the top line moves. So the bottom line moves. And so with the bottom line, we do get a sense of shock. But it also talks about laughter. And so it talks about something happening, and we completely maybe freak out about it. And then we look at it again, and it's really telling us that there's really no need to panic. And so, again, that's perhaps the essence of this hexagram, the bottom line. There is no need to panic. And then the third line from the bottom moves. And so with the third line from the bottom moving, it really does tell us that, there is something going on. That, we shouldn't trivialize what is happening. And we perhaps need to, not look beyond the situation and just accept it to an extent. But again, it doesn't indicate that anything particularly bad is going to happen. But then the top line moves, and the top line indicates, in terms of whatever dramas there are, it does say, yes, actually, there is some kind of danger. Something is changing, and it is a dramatic change. And handled in the wrong way, yes, our interests could be undermined. But the I Ching does give some advice. It does tell us that if we keep still, we don't do anything, stay exactly where we are, that is the way to get round the problem. So it's not a time to be overreacting. We have to, just stay where we are. And that's so often the case, isn't it? When people, get into trouble, when things go wrong, there's always that inclination to act, because we always hate it, when we do nothing. It's so bad, you've got to do something. But it's the actions, it's a response that causes the damage. And so by doing nothing, by staying as we are, we can get over the problem, and we can start to think about the hexagram which this moves to. And with three lines moving, we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 56, which is the Wanderer. And this may indicate, just looking at the previous hexagram, thunderbolts, it suggests that something has happened, and it may be that some of our ideas have been altered. Some things we'd taken for granted have changed, and so we become the Wanderer. We've had to move away from something we really thought we could trust, and we can't trust it anymore because it's been undermined. Something did happen with 51, with the thunderbolt. Yeah, we had to stay still up to a point, but then we realised that we're perhaps not as secure as we thought we were, and the Wanderer doesn't have a home. I'm not saying you're going to be made homeless or anything like that. It's the Wanderer can just not know what's going on. The Wanderer might be naive. The Wanderer is in strange territory. And so because of that situation, the Wanderer has to be modest and has to understand the situation, and has to also, I suppose, accept all the help that is available. And, the modesty comes from, if you are in a strange land, you can't just say that you understand the rules, because you don't understand the rules. That's the nature of being a wanderer. And what the Wanderer is fundamentally looking for is a home. So it does seem, in terms of a previous hexagram, the thunderbolts, it's something we had really taken for granted has been undermined. I mean, I don't think we have been sort of destroyed or seriously damaged by what's happened. Maybe it was just something, its time had come. And I think that the I Ching is talking to an extent about fate. It was fated for something to go at a particular time. Its time had arrived, and it was now time for us to realize that enough was enough. And so we have made that move, and now we're trying to get back to where things were before. I mean, things are never going to be exactly the same, but we have to just recognize that there is a moment of weakness here with the Wanderer, and we're trying to return things to normality and rediscover our home and rediscover the security which perhaps had been undermined at the beginning with the Thunderbolt. But do remember, this is a hexagram just for one day, and I don't think there's anything actually unfortunate about what's happening. I just think it was perhaps a time to make a bit of a change, and I think that fate has perhaps forced us to make a change and to recognize that something couldn't go on in the old way. And so there is just a moment of feeling a little bit insecure, being the Wanderer, and it just takes a bit of time to re-find our feet, I suppose, re-find our grounding, because we are looking for home. But it does seem that I think in the end we'll find the security that really is important to us. And now I want to consider the horoscope of Michael Saylor. And Michael Saylor is someone who's just been getting a lot of coverage recently. I mean, not quite on the level of Elon Musk, but he's kind of up there with Elon Musk, and someone who's very much an opinion former. He's a radical advocate of Bitcoin. I mean, Michael Saylor believes that Bitcoin is it, that Bitcoin is the future. I mean, what Bitcoin is, I know it's gone down quite a lot over the last day or two, but I think it was $93,000 last time I looked. It got up to 108,000, and Michael Saylor says that in a few decades' time it'll be worth $10 million or something like that, but it will almost become a sort of a neutral reserve currency. So he's a huge advocate of Bitcoin. And so much so that his company, Microstrategy, is put all its spare cash into Bitcoin and is borrowing on the basis of its Bitcoin. And the assumption is Bitcoin is scarce because there are only 21 million Bitcoin. So that's the theory. And a lot of that Bitcoin has been lost. So there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So it can only go up. And that is Michael Saylor's view. I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at Michael Saylor's horoscope. And now I tried to sort of guess what his star sign was, and my guess was Aquarius. And I really had a strong feeling he was an air sign. And indeed, he was an Aquarius. I think my second guess was Libra. But when you're guessing, I don't know about you, but I always like to play this game when I come across someone new. And when I say star sign, I mean the sun sign. I like to play this guessing game, and I just think it's very important for your first guess. The first sign that comes to your head, even if it's not logical, is the one you should go for. And the first sign that came to my mind was Aquarius. The second sign was Libra, and I was thinking, well, maybe it's a Libra. I mean, the sign of the scales came to mind, but the first sign I thought of was Aquarius. And indeed, Michael Saylor is an Aquarius. Of course, there's a selection bias, isn't there? One always focuses on when one gets it right rather than when one gets it wrong. I don't have a time of birth for Michael Saylor. So he was born in Lincoln, Nebraska at February the 4th, 1965. And I think it is appropriate that Michael Saylor is is an Aquarius. His company announced that they were going to start buying Bitcoin at the end of, I think at the end of July 2020. And that was just before the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was the end of December 2020, and it was at 0 degrees Aquarius. And so we are in quite an Aquarius time. We've had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. We've now got Pluto in Aquarius, and you could say that this is very much the age of Bitcoin. Now, I understand that the Bitcoin came into being in 2009 when Pluto was in Capricorn, but perhaps we're now seeing Bitcoin come of age. Perhaps I'm not giving any financial advice. I'm not saying that Bitcoin is wonderul or that you should buy Bitcoin. It's just a sort of an astrological observation that it fits that Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius is, Aquarius is the opposite sign to Leo. And of course, the sun rules Leo. And of course, the sun is a planet which is associated with gold. And there is a view that Bitcoin is going to replace gold. Again, I'm not saying it's right, but maybe while Pluto is in Aquarius, people are going to have that view because Aquarius is the anti-Leo. And so, again, that's another reason why it's so fitting that Michael Saylor has the sun in Aquarius. And aside from his sun in Aquarius, his sun is at 15 degrees Aquarius. And I think that is also important because the sun at 15 Aquarius is, it's semi-square the Aries point. And so the Aries point represents the world. And so if you've got the sun at 15 Aquarius, you may be more sort of connected with the world, than perhaps if the sun is other places, it's whether it's 0 degrees cardinal or 15 degrees fixed, those parts of the zodiac are kind of special. So that's his sun in Aquarius. Now, you might also notice that he's got sun square Neptune. Now, sun square Neptune in Scorpio, you could argue that represents a fundamental delusion. And, look at what he's done to his company. And, I mean, Microstrategy, his company, has had problems before. I mean, Microstrategy had huge problems at the time of the dot-com crash, because Microstrategy became a public company in June 1998, and then on March of 20th, 2000, around the time of the dot-com crash, they had to redo their estimates, I think, of their profits, and they realized they'd been overstating their profits for 2 years, and of course that had a devastating impact on the share price. The share price, I think, went from $300 down to $9. So he has crashed and burnt before. And so here is someone who's got sun square Neptune. And so the question is he going to crash and burn again? And so that's certainly something one has to watch out for. And he was born in the mid-60s. He is going to be 60 next month. So he's born on February the 4th. And so he has all of these. He has this sort of outer planet. Look at the outer planets. He's one of that generation born with a Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo, opposition Chiron, and that opposition Chiron. Chiron is the maverick, and I suppose you could say with Pluto opposition Chiron, Uranus opposition Chiron, it's a generation of people who want to be different, who are trying to be different. Not always easy. And he certainly is something of a maverick. I mean, okay, it's not a personal planet, Pluto opposition Chiron, but somehow he's sort of picked up on what's going on in the collective, Now, the question is, why did he go for Bitcoin? And what I find interesting about this chart is that he doesn't have any fire in his chart. So, I'm thinking about this, and was it some sort of wonderful intuitive process? He suddenly made this connection, that fiery connection, intuitive connection about Bitcoin is the answer. Well, I do have my doubts. If you remember that, when you think about fire and intuition, it's like that. What Carl Jung was a Leo, and he said that, talking about whether he believes in God, and he says he doesn't believe in God. He knows that God exists. That is an incredibly intuitive thing to say. To believe in God, that's a watery thing to say. That's about faith. But fire is about sort of just knowing. And he doesn't have any fire in his chart. So I'm just unconvinced that he really came to some intuitive, instant understanding that Bitcoin was the answer. I think it was more perhaps of an air-water approach. I think the way he described it through 2000, that the company was trying to work out what asset they should put their money into, because they were perhaps aware that inflation would perhaps sap it away. Remember, this was 2020 when there were huge worries about inflation and about the falling dollar. Okay, things have changed. Now the dollar is like super strong, but then in 2020 there were real concerns about the dollar and inflation. And so he possibly sort of had to sort of work out logically where to put the company's money. So I'm thinking that's a bit of an air-water kind of thing, isn't it? I mean, air tries to work out where do we put our money. I suppose you could say the earth is a bit concerned about it, but air is working it out. Then, of course, he's got the moon in Pisces. I don't know what time he's born, but he's certainly got the moon in Pisces. So maybe the moon in Pisces is sort of trying to feel its way through. Okay, it may be. Is money important? That's Earth. I mean, he's got a lot of planets in Earth signs. I think his Venus is in Capricorn. I know it's his Venus is in the last degree of Capricorn. I think whenever he's born, the Venus is in Capricorn. So he's got Earth, he's got water, he's got air. So whatever that process was, I do not think that it was his intuition. I don't think that was what it was about. So there is then perhaps the question of what was happening to him when he made this decision. So the company Microstrategy announced that they were going to get into Bitcoin on July the 28th, 2020, and I suppose from then on and through into August, they started buying Bitcoin, and they just kept buying, and they're still buying, and it's like they started perhaps on a relatively small scale, and they just completely went for it, and now the whole nature of the company has changed. So looking at the kind of transits that Michael Saylor was experiencing at the time of this decision. I mean, perhaps not what one might expect. I mean, he has Venus in the last degree of Capricorn, but he had Saturn. Transiting Saturn was on his Venus when he made this decision. So, that perhaps tells us something. I mean, that seems to me to be quite a worried decision. When Saturn is on your Venus, you're perhaps having questions about your money and perhaps your company. And he responded to these doubts about the future of Microstrategy because I believe that there was a feeling that maybe the company's business was just not really going anywhere. They were making money, but the company wasn't necessarily developing and as it stood, and they wanted to do something different. And so that might have really stirred it up, that Saturn conjunct Venus. So it wasn't necessarily a sort of a positive, exciting decision. It was perhaps a decision that was maybe, as far as he was concerned, happened out of necessity. But also, Michael Saylor has his North Node at 21 Gemini, and so Venus was conjunct his North Node. So I suppose you could say that indicates that for him, maybe it was the right decision. I mean, the North Node, he had the North Node in Gemini. North Node in Gemini is, it's quite curious, looking for interesting things. Bitcoin is, I suppose, perhaps interesting. And so he has Venus on his North Node as he's making the decision to really go for Bitcoin. And so that's kind of interesting. So the two main aspects were Saturn conjunct his Venus and Venus conjunct his North Node. And I was thinking about Michael Saylor, also about what was going on when he had to restate the company's profits, which was a real disaster for the company. I think they were fined. I suppose the company was on the brink. So here is the restatement chart. This was I don't know what time of day it was, but it was March the 20th, 2020, just after the company. Well, at the time the company made the decision. After that, share price just crashed and crashed and crashed. And you can see the restatement took place at the time of a new moon. So there was a new moon full moon. So there was a full moon at around 0 degrees Aries. I mean, a very important full moon taking place around March 20th, 2000. I mean, there was a full moon which was close to the Aries ingress. So it was on the spring equinox, full moon. So it's going to be it was a powerful new moon for the world. And I think actually the dot-com crash happened a little bit earlier. I think it was at the beginning of March. March the 6th comes to mind. But March 2000 was the month where everything fell apart. With that when the dot-com crash really started, and it really continued until 2003, until the invasion of Iraq. Then things started to recover. So that was a full moon. That was a restatement of his chart, and I think it happened as Mercury was sort of in Pisces. Mercury was moving into Pisces. That's when the crash happened. So, in terms of Saylor's chart and looking at what was going on in Saylor's chart when that happened, you can see that Uranus was square his Neptune. And so remember, he's got a Sun-Neptune square in his chart. So I suppose normally Uranus square of Neptune is a bit of a generational thing, but perhaps because he's got Sun square his Neptune anyway, I think Uranus square Neptune really didn't help. So that was one thing going on. He also had Saturn problems, because Saturn at the time of his restatement of the company's profits was at 1418 Taurus. So Saturn was moving towards the square of his Sun. And remember, he's got his Sun at 15 Aquarius, close to the 45-degree aspect of the cardinal point. Saturn was moving towards a square of the Sun. So you had the Aries point. In fact, if you look at this, you had the Sun and Saturn were semi-square each other. So So that full moon was making a 45-degree aspect to Saturn, and it was also hitting his sun, and of course Uranus was square his Neptune. So I think there were a lot of things going on to undermine his chart, and he's got the sun on the Aries point, and he's got Saturn hitting it. So we can see the problems there. And now I wanted to look at the companies. So, when you're doing the astrology of companies, there's always the question of which chart do you look at. So with a company like Microstrategy, you have the chart, of when the company was formed in the first place, and then you might have other charts of reorganizations, and then you've got the chart of when it becomes a public company, when you can start to sort of trade its shares on a stock exchange, and it's sort of a public company. When you can trade its shares on a stock exchange, I suppose that could be sort of more relevant for the share price. So MicroStrategy started, I believe, in 1989. So here is the chart for when it started, sort of November the 17th, 1989. So Michael Saylor was in his early 20s when MicroStrategy came into being. And it's, again, interesting that there is a lack of fire in this chart. So, Michael Saylor, as we know, he doesn't he doesn't have any fire in his chart except the South Node in Sagittarius, and likewise with MicroStrategy, there's no fire in his chart except the South Node again, except this time the South Node in Leo. So in some ways he's really gravitating here towards a time when there was no fire. I mean, the moon is at 25 Leo. Okay, the moon would have 25 Cancer. So the moon would have gone into Leo right at the end of the day, but November the 17th. I mean, I think I got this chart from an article in Business Insider. So I've only got one source for it. I know it was definitely November 1989. I looked at this article in Business Insider. Said I think it's Business Insider said November the 17th. So I'm going for that. Apologies if I got it wrong. And so that is of interest, and this chart is very linked with the outer planets. It took shape at the time of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, and I suppose from an electional point of view, was this a good time to launch a company? Well, I don't know what time you take to launch it, but the moon is in Cancer, trine the sun in Scorpio on November the 17th. And so I would have said that's pretty good. I mean, you should look at the lights, the sun and the moon. Moon is in its own sign in Cancer, trine the sun. I think that would strike me as being a good time to form this company. Now, in terms of what was happening I suppose one should look at what was happening in Saylor's chart when he formed this company. I mean, this was an important event for young Michael Saylor as he when his company came into being. There's his chart, and I don't know if I see anything particularly dramatic going on. I mean, he has Venus in Capricorn, but there's nothing. I don't think there's anything particularly aspecting that Venus in Capricorn. And I mean, the Sun is, well, actually we've got Mercury at 29 Scorpio, was making a trine to his Venus. I mean, I think just off the top of my head, that's the main thing I notice. Plus, Venus is so Pluto. He's got Pluto sextile Venus, so he has Pluto in Virgo and Pluto's in Scorpio. So there are a few aspects there, but I would not have said there's anything really dramatic there. So you look at a company's chart and you try to see if you can use that chart to predict what, for example, is going to happen to the share price. I mean, that's what astrologers often try to do. I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, it sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? You just look at a company's chart, and you can make tons of money because you can just look at the transits. Easy, isn't it? Of course, in practice, it's not so easy. If it was easy, well, would I be sitting here? I don't know. But it's certainly not as easy as it sounds. And so, what about Microstrategy during the 2000 debacle on March the 20th? So if we look at this chart with when they were forced to restate, here's the restatement chart, and so we have Microstrategy and a restatement. So that 1989 event, can we really pick up on anything there? And so the company had Pluto in Scorpio. So Pluto was, right in the middle of Scorpio, and it's just interesting that that Saylor had his sun at 15 Aquarius. So he formed this company in 1989 as Pluto was square his sun. So that's a transit I missed. So Pluto was square his sun. So I mean, one often sees Pluto square sun as being quite a difficult aspect, but for Saylor, his Pluto square sun was a very beneficial aspect. Allowed him to form a company. He didn't do it on his own. I mean, he had partners, but so that's the Pluto. And at the time of this, when he was forced to restate the company's profits on March 2000, Saturn was square the company's Pluto. So again, that's quite collective, isn't it? It's a very sort of collective energy, Pluto. But it perhaps is something that we should look at. Also, Uranus was kind of conjunct the North Node. I wouldn't have said that conjunct the North Node is especially destructive. But that's just one chart. There is another chart for Microstrategy we could be looking at, and that is the chart for when Microstrategy became a public company. And this software Kepler, it comes with a database. When I bought the program, it has loads and loads of company charts in it, and Microstrategy was one of the companies that came with the software. It just shows how perhaps how long Microstrategy has been around for. When did I buy this program? I bought it about 2018, something like that. And so June the 11th, 1998 was when 9:30 a.m. opening of the New York Stock Exchange was when you could first start trading Microstrategy. And so that's a chart, and I think that this chart is perhaps something you should look at in terms of perhaps trying to work out what's going on with the share price, in theory at least. So there's firstly the question of what was happening at the time of when they were forced to restate their profits, if anything. So Venus was at 1442 Taurus when Microstrategy came to the market in 1998, and Saturn was at 1416 Taurus when the news came out, when the share price started to plunge. So the company had, it wasn't just that Saturn was square Saylor's sun, it was the fact that Saturn was square the Microstrategy as a public company's Venus. And so Venus is the planet of money, of profits, and so the company really took a hit there. And so maybe if you were trying to work out whether to sell your shares in Microstrategy or even whether to short Microstrategy, you might have been looking at these charts in March 2000, and you would have seen these transits, and you might have sort of jumped to the conclusion that now was the time to act. But it is a dangerous approach, I would have said. Look at Pluto. Pluto was at 1254 Sagittarius, and so the company had its Mars. Again, the company as in when the company's shares were first traded, Mars was at 1258 Sagittarius. So Pluto was exactly opposition to Mars. So that would have given you more information. So I think that there was perhaps a lot of hints here in this chart that something was about to go wrong. And then there is the moment when the company announced that it was going to buy Bitcoin. And I'm not saying anything special was going on. So let's go back to that moment when the company formed in 1989 and see if that announcement really was important on June the 28th, 2020, and that was when the company just completely changed. And after that, I suppose you could say went from strength to strength. MicroStrategy did have a major crash in around 2022, after the bottom fell out of a crypto market, and then naturally the bottom fell out of the MicroStrategy share price, but it has recovered quite very strongly. Although, interestingly, at the time in 2000, it got as high as $300. It actually hasn't. It went to $500 about a month ago. It's now $324. So it's not right now. It's not actually much higher than it was in 2000. And so, comparing that with the Bitcoin decision, that original chart, and I'm not, again, I don't think in this case. So we've got the 1989 chart doesn't seem particularly sensitive. I think when we looked at that disaster in 2020, that 1989 chart didn't seem to be very very descriptive about what was going on. But there is a Uranus trine. When they made that decision in 2020, Uranus was at 1034 Taurus. And remember, in 1989, there was that Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 10 Capricorn. So Saturn-Neptune, Uranus was trine that Saturn-Neptune. So perhaps that Saturn-Neptune in Capricorn represented many of the fears that were around at the time that company was formed. 1989, certainly in the UK, the economy was really starting to fall apart. I remember London house prices in 1989 were that's when I think when they peaked, when they started to fall. There was actually quite a dramatic fall in the sort of very late 80s and early 90s in house prices in the UK. That was the time to buy, and that was the first point. I think even in the US, things weren't too good economically. So there was probably a lot of doubt around, and that doubt perhaps was resurfacing in 2020, and so Uranus was the solution. A solution suddenly came to that when it hit that 1989 chart, and Uranus was, not just trine the Saturn, not just trine the Saturn Neptune conjunction, but it was also sextile the company's Jupiter in Cancer, and it was opposition the company's Mars. So a lot of planets at 10. So we had Jupiter at 10 Capricorn, 10 Cancer, opposition Saturn Neptune at 10 Aquarius, and Uranus really hit it, and of course Uranus was also opposition the company's Mars. So that 1989 chart was certainly impacted by Uranus. As far as the incorporation chart is concerned, here's the incorporation chart, June the 11th, 1998, and turning to the decision to buy Bitcoin, and here it is. Again, Venus is Venus was conjunct the company's Sun, and so Venus was hitting Saylor's North Node, and so Saylor, if you going back to Saylor's chart, so let's look at Saylor's chart, Michael Saylor. So see, Saylor has his North Node at 21-24 Gemini, just to remind you, and the North Node is where he's going to. That is something very constructive for him, and there you have company goes public, and the Sun is on his North Node. So absolutely the right thing to do. Also, when they went public, there was a Sun-Mercury conjunction on his North Node, and then when they made the decision to start buying Bitcoin, Venus was on that point. So that was quite a critical point in the chart. So let's get the right chart here. So there's Venus hitting that point. I think that point was quite important there. So those are a few thoughts on the Bitcoin decision. Oh, look at Neptune, by the way, as a final point. Neptune was at 20 degrees 38 Pisces. So Neptune was square the 1998 Sun. Now, does that say that it was a bad decision? Well, so far the decision seems to be pretty good, but maybe it was a risky decision. There was that Venus square Neptune when they made the announcement on July the 28th. There was that Venus square Neptune hitting a company's Sun. This certainly changed the company. You could say, did it weaken the company? At the time, you might have been a bit worried about it. But again, so far so good. Was Neptune working in the company's favour or not? I mean, who knows? One thing about Saylor's chart, before I wrap up, is that Michael Saylor has his Mars at 27 Virgo, and of course at the moment this is where Neptune is, so he's got Neptune opposition his Mars. So how's that going to work out? Okay, as Neptune has been opposition his Mars, well, the share price of Microstrategy has fallen quite a lot. I mean, it sort of peaked, I think, in the beginning of December. It was at $500, and now it's $324 last time I looked. So that's quite a hefty fall in the last month or two. I'm sorry, in the last month. So so Mars is opposition. He's got Neptune opposition his Mars. I suppose for his sake, and MicroStrategy's sake, and its investors, one hopes when one wants just Neptune to move on, move into Aries, move away from that. So I don't know. It seems to be, with MicroStrategy, astrology aside, it does seem to be quite a dangerous thing to be doing, just piling money into Bitcoin and making this assumption that Bitcoin will carry on increasing. But I think, well, there's a lot astrologically to talk about. I'm sorry. The end of this video ended up as being a bit of a list, but the point I'm trying to make is that if you're trying to understand a company, it can be useful to look at the chart of incorporation, the chart that when the company becomes public, when you can start buying shares in it, and also, of course, to look at the chart of its founder and its senior management. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today. If you found this video of interest, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be incredibly grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.